When coach William Butler made the decision to bench Marcus Duncan for wearing worn-out sneakers, he had no idea he'd soon be facing Michael Jordan himself. Drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from today, because this story of compassion and justice will leave you speechless. The pristine gymnasium of Lake Forest Academy gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, its polished hardwood floor reflecting the school's prestigious reputation. It was the kind of private school where Range Rovers and Mercedes filled the parking lot, where basketball uniforms were always crisp and new, and where appearance mattered almost as much as performance. Coach Butler stood at the sideline, his designer tracksuit and gold watch making it clear he felt right at home among the wealthy parents who filled the bleachers. He was known for turning the Lake Forest Warriors into a powerhouse program, though his methods often raised eyebrows among other coaches. But with 6 regional championships in 8 years, few dared to question his approach. Marcus Duncan didn't fit the Lake Forest image. His basketball shoes were held together with duct tape, the sole partially separated on the right one. But what the 14-year-old lacked in equipment, he made up for in raw talent. Even during warm-ups, his natural ability was obvious to anyone who understood basketball. His jump shot was pure, his handles impressive, and his court awareness well beyond his years. The game against their biggest rivals was about to begin, and Marcus, despite being the team's starting point guard for every game this season, found himself sitting at the end of the bench. His replacement, Timothy Wallace, was the son of one of the school's biggest donors. The contrast between Timothy's brand new signature shoes and Marcus's taped-up sneakers couldn't have been more stark. "Can't have you out there looking like that," Coach Butler had told Marcus just before the game. "It reflects poorly on our program. You understand, don't you? We have standards to maintain." Marcus had said nothing, just nodded and taken his place on the bench, trying to hide the hurt in his eyes. He was only at Lake Forest because of a special academic scholarship, his single mother working 2 jobs to cover the remaining expenses. They could barely afford. Basketball was supposed to be his way to a better future, his ticket to a college scholarship. What no one in the gym knew was that among the parents and college scouts in attendance that night was Michael Jordan himself. He had come to watch the game on the recommendation of a friend who had told him about a promising young player, Marcus Duncan. Jordan sat quietly in the back row, observing everything with those same calculating eyes that had seen through countless opponents during his legendary career. The first quarter was a disaster for Lake Forest. Timothy Wallace, despite his expensive shoes and private training sessions, was clearly out of his depth as a starting point guard. The team's offense was stagnant, their defense disorganized. By the end of the first quarter, they were down by 15 points. Parents in the stands began to whisper, wondering why Marcus wasn't playing. They had grown used to seeing his creative playmaking and leadership on the court. But Coach Butler remained stubborn, his jaw set as he watched his team struggle. During a timeout, Jordan overheard 2 parents discussing the situation. The story of Marcus's benching spread quickly through the bleachers. How Coach Butler had pulled him aside just before the game. How the boy's worn-out shoes had been deemed inappropriate for our program's image. Jordan's expression darkened as he listened. The whispers painted a clear picture. A talented kid being denied his chance not because of his ability, but because his family couldn't afford new basketball shoes. It was the kind of story that struck a particular nerve with Jordan, who had once been cut from his high school team and used that rejection as fuel to become the greatest player of all time. As the second quarter began, Jordan rose from his seat and made his way down to the court. The crowd began to murmur as they recognized him, but he paid them no attention. His focus was entirely on Coach Butler, who was still berating his struggling team during a timeout. "Interesting coaching decision," Jordan said, his voice carrying that same quiet intensity that had made professional players nervous during his playing days. Benching your best player over shoes. Is that what basketball's about now? Coach Butler turned, his face flushing as he recognized Jordan. The gym had gone completely silent. Even the opposing team stopped their warm-ups to watch what was unfolding. "Mr. Jordan," Butler stammered, we have certain standards here at Lake Forest. Image is important for our program." Jordan's response was measured but cutting. "Standards? I saw your standards struggling to bring the ball up court just now. Tell me something, coach. What color were my shoes when I scored 70 points against the Celtics?" Butler blinked, confused by the question. I don't remember." "Exactly," Jordan said. "Nobody remembers the shoes. They remember the player. They remember the heart. They remember the game." He turned to look at Marcus, who was sitting at the end of the bench, trying to make himself invisible. "How many points are you averaging this season, son?" 17 points and 8 assists, Marcus answered quietly. Jordan turned back to Butler. 17 points and 8 assists. Wearing taped-up shoes. Imagine what he could do with proper support instead of judgment. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "Let me make a call real quick. Don't go anywhere, coach. We're not done here." The next few minutes became the stuff of basketball legend. Jordan made a single phone call, speaking quietly into his phone, while the gym remained silent, everyone watching with a mixture of awe and anticipation. When he finished the call, he turned back to Coach Butler with a smile that had nothing to do with amusement. "There's a Nike representative heading here right now. She'll be here in 20 minutes with several pairs of shoes. Not just for Marcus, for any kid on your team who needs them. Now you have two choices, coach. You can put Marcus back in the game right now, taped up shoes and all, or you can explain to everyone here, including the college scouts in attendance, why you think expensive shoes matter more than heart, talent, and character." Coach Butler's face went through a series of emotions: embarrassment, anger, fear, and finally resignation. He looked at Marcus, then at the scoreboard showing their 15-point deficit, then back at Jordan. "Marcus," he said, his voice notably softer, "get ready to go in after this timeout." But Jordan wasn't finished. "Before he goes in, I think you owe him something more valuable than shoes." The gym was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Coach Butler looked at Marcus, and for the first time that night, perhaps for the first time ever, he really saw him. Not his shoes, not his economic status, but the kid who loved basketball so much, he played his heart out in taped-up sneakers. "I'm sorry, Marcus," Butler said, and to his credit, he seemed to mean it. "I was wrong, very wrong. Show me what you can do out there." What happened next would be talked about in Illinois high school basketball circles for years to come. Marcus Duncan, still in his taped-up shoes, proceeded to put on a show that had Jordan nodding in approval from the sideline. By halftime, the 15-point deficit was down to 3. By the end of the third quarter, Lake Forest had taken the lead, but the real story wasn't in the score. It was in the transformation happening on that court, not just in the game, but in the hearts and minds of everyone watching. Parents who had never thought twice about economic disparities in their community were suddenly seeing things differently. Players on both teams were witnessing a powerful lesson about what really matters in sports and in life. The Nike representative arrived as promised, carrying boxes of shoes. But by then, Marcus was in the middle of the best game of his life, and nobody wanted him to change a thing. Those taped-up shoes had become a symbol of something more important than appearance or status. Jordan stayed for the entire game, watching from the sideline as Marcus led his team to victory. But more than the win, it was what happened after. The game that would leave a lasting impact on everyone present. Coach Butler gathered his team and in front of everyone, including Jordan, delivered a speech that showed he had learned something valuable that night. "I've been coaching basketball for 20 years," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and tonight I was taught the most important lesson of my career. Basketball isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about what's in your heart, what's in your character. Marcus, you didn't just lead us to a victory tonight. You taught us all something about dignity, about perseverance, and about what really matters in this game and in life." As the gym began to clear out, Jordan had one final word with Marcus. Nobody heard what was said between them, but the smile on Marcus's face said everything. That night became more than just a story about basketball. It became a lesson about judgment, about opportunity, and about the power of standing up for what's right. The story spread quickly through the basketball community, but its impact went far beyond sports. It sparked a larger conversation about accessibility in youth sports, about economic barriers, and about the true meaning of team spirit. Coach Butler, to his credit, became a changed man, establishing a program to ensure that no player would ever be benched for economic reasons again. And those taped-up shoes? They found a place of honor in the Lake Forest Academy trophy case, next to a simple plaque that reads, "Character over everything." A reminder to everyone who passes by that the true measure of an athlete and a person has nothing to do with what they wear on their feet and everything to do with how they carry themselves in the face of adversity. The morning after Marcus Duncan's legendary game, Lake Forest Academy was buzzing with an energy it had never known before. The story of Michael Jordan's intervention had spread far beyond the gymnasium walls, and local news vans were already parked outside the school gates. But inside his office, Coach William Butler sat alone, staring at the game tape from the night before, watching a very different story unfold than the one he'd been telling himself for years. On the screen, Marcus Duncan's performance wasn't just impressive, it was revelatory. Every play, every decision, every selfless act showed something Butler had missed while being fixated on appearances. The taped-up shoes, which had seemed so problematic just a day ago, were barely noticeable when you focused on the pure basketball being played. "Coach?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Daniel Harrison, one of his assistant coaches. "The principal wants to see you, and there's someone else here too." That someone else turned out to be James Miller, a former NBA player who now ran one of the largest youth basketball foundations in Chicago. He was waiting in the principal's office alongside Sarah Douglas, the school's principal, and to Butler's surprise, Michael Jordan himself had returned. "Good morning, Coach Butler," Jordan said, his presence filling the room just as it had the gymnasium the night before. "I think it's time we had a longer conversation about what happened yesterday, and more importantly, about what happens next." Principal Douglas spoke first, her voice carrying both concern and determination. "What happened last night has forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our athletic program, about our school, and about our community. Mr. Jordan and Mr. Miller have made us an interesting proposal." James Miller stepped forward, opening a folder filled with statistics and reports. "We've been tracking economic disparities in high school sports for years. What happened with Marcus Duncan isn't an isolated incident. It's happening all over the country. But sometimes it takes one story, one moment to catalyze real change." The proposal they laid out was both simple and revolutionary. Jordan and Miller's foundation would establish a comprehensive support program at Lake Forest Academy, ensuring that no student athlete would ever be held back by economic circumstances again. But there was a catch. They wanted Coach Butler to be actively involved in its implementation. "Why me?" Butler asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "After what happened?" "Because," Jordan interrupted, "the best teachers are often those who've learned the hardest lessons. You made a mistake, Coach, a big one. But what matters now is what you do next." As they discussed the details, Marcus Duncan was having his own meaningful conversation in the school cafeteria. Timothy Wallace, the wealthy student who had started in his place the night before, approached his table with an unexpected confession. "I knew it was wrong," Timothy said, sitting down across from Marcus. "When Coach Butler benched you, I knew I should have said something. I'm sorry, Marcus. You're twice the player I am, and what happened wasn't fair." Marcus's response showed the same grace he'd displayed on the court. "It's not about being a better player, Tim. It's about everyone getting a fair chance to play the game they love." Word of this exchange made its way back to Coach Butler, adding another layer to his ongoing transformation. The coach was beginning to understand that the real impact of his actions went far beyond basketball. He had been unconsciously reinforcing social barriers that had no place in sports or education. By mid-morning, the story had caught fire on social media. Taped-up shoes was trending, with young athletes across the country sharing their own stories of economic barriers in sports. Professional players began weighing in, many sharing their own humble beginnings and the challenges they'd overcome, but the most powerful response came from unexpected quarters. Local business owners, many of them Lake Forest Academy alumni, began reaching out to the school. They wanted to help establish a fund for athletic equipment and supplies, ensuring that no student would ever feel out of place on their teams again. Edward Thompson, a successful businessman and former Lake Forest basketball player, took it a step further. He announced he would match any donations to the new program dollar for dollar. "What happened with Marcus Duncan made me remember my own high school days," he told the local news. "I was lucky. My family could afford the best equipment. But talent doesn't check your bank account before deciding where to land." Coach Butler spent the afternoon in a series of meetings with his team, having the kinds of conversations he should have been having all along. He learned about Stephen Patrick, whose family had been skipping meals to afford his basketball shoes. About Christina Lawrence, who had been wearing her older brother's hand-me-down practice gear, hoping no one would notice. "I've been so focused on how we look," Butler admitted to his team, "that I forgot to see who we are. That changes today." The team's response was immediate and overwhelming. Players from wealthy families offered to help their teammates. Parents began organizing carpools and equipment exchanges. The walls that had divided the team along economic lines began to crumble. But the most profound change was happening in the heart of Marcus Duncan himself. Jordan had arranged for him to speak at several youth basketball camps, sharing his story and the lessons learned. Standing before groups of young players, Marcus found his voice. "These shoes," he would say, holding up his taped-up sneakers, "they're not just about basketball. They're about dignity, about refusing to let circumstances define your worth, about playing the game you love with whatever you have." His mother, Dana Jones, watched these speeches with tears in her eyes. "Marcus has always been special," she told a local reporter. "But it took someone like Michael Jordan to make others see what I've always known. That character shines through, no matter what you're wearing." The impact continued to spread. Other schools in the district began examining their own athletic programs, looking for hidden barriers they might have overlooked. The State Athletic Association announced a task force to address economic inequities in high school sports. Coach Butler, for his part, threw himself into the new initiative with the same intensity he had once reserved for maintaining the program's image. He worked with Jordan and Miller's Foundation to develop guidelines for identifying and supporting student athletes in need, ensuring that help would be provided discreetly and respectfully. The hardest part, Butler admitted during a coaches' conference where he was asked to speak about his experience, was confronting my own biases. I had to ask myself some difficult questions about why I valued appearance over ability, image over integrity. The Foundations program at Lake Forest Academy became a model for other schools. It wasn't just about providing equipment. It was about changing the culture of youth sports. They established mentoring programs, academic support, and even career guidance for student athletes and their families. Marcus Duncan's taped-up shoes, still on display in the trophy case, became a symbol of this transformation. Students would stop to look at them, reading the plaque and reflecting on its message. But it was what happened next that truly showed the depth of change at Lake Forest Academy. When the next season began, Coach Butler instituted a new tradition. Before the first game, the entire team would gather around the trophy case. Each player would touch the glass over those taped-up shoes, reminding themselves that character and talent matter more than appearances. Timothy Wallace, who had started in Marcus's place that fateful night, became one of the program's strongest advocates. He convinced his father to establish a scholarship fund for student athletes, naming it the Marcus Duncan Opportunity Fund. "What I learned that night," Timothy would later say at the fund's launch event, "wasn't just about basketball. It was about privilege, responsibility, and the power of standing up for what's right." The story continued to resonate beyond the basketball court. Teachers reported that students were showing more empathy, more awareness of economic disparities among their peers. The school's culture was shifting, becoming more inclusive, more supportive. Jordan made occasional visits to check on the program's progress, each time spending extra time with Marcus. Their conversations went beyond basketball, touching on leadership, character, and the responsibility that comes with influence. "You know what impressed me most?" Jordan said during one of these visits, watching Marcus mentor younger players. "Not your game, though that was impressive. It was your dignity. The way you handled yourself when things weren't fair. That's what champions are made of." Coach Butler, transformed by the experience, began keeping a journal of lessons learned. He shared these insights with other coaches, helping them identify and address similar issues in their own programs. The journal eventually became a manual for implementing inclusive athletic programs used by schools across the country. 1 year after the incident, Lake Forest Academy hosted a special game to celebrate the changes that had taken place. Teams from across the district participated, all wearing mismatched shoes to symbolize that equipment doesn't define an athlete's worth. Marcus Duncan, now a junior and team captain, led his team onto the court that night. His shoes were new, a gift from Jordan's foundation, but he played with the same heart that had carried him through countless games in taped-up sneakers. During halftime, Coach Butler addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "A year ago, I thought I knew what made a successful basketball program. I was focused on the surface, the uniforms, the shoes, the image we presented. But thanks to a brave young man and a legend who refused to stay silent, I learned that true success in sports and in life is measured by the character we build, the barriers we break, and the opportunities we create for others." The story of Michael Jordan confronting a coach who benched a kid for being poor could have ended that first night in the gymnasium. Instead, it became a catalyst for lasting change, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful lessons in sports have nothing to do with the game itself. And somewhere in Chicago, a pair of taped-up basketball shoes sits in a trophy case, telling a story that continues to inspire new generations of players, coaches, and communities to look beyond the surface and see the heart of what really matters. 6 months after the Lake Forest Academy incident, Michael Jordan found himself sitting in a conference room at the National High School Athletic Association's headquarters. Around the table sat athletic directors, coaches, and administrators from across the country. They had gathered to discuss what had become known as the Marcus Duncan effect, a sweeping movement to address economic barriers in youth sports. It started with a pair of taped-up shoes, Jordan began, his voice carrying the same intensity. It had that night in the gymnasium, but what we uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. How many Marcus Duncans are out there, sitting on benches, not because they lack talent, but because they lack resources. The statistics presented that day were sobering. A comprehensive survey, initiated after the Lake Forest story went viral, revealed that thousands of student athletes across the country were facing similar barriers. Some couldn't afford proper equipment. Others missed tryouts because they lacked transportation. Many were working part-time jobs to help their families, leaving little time for practice. Robert Jensen, a prominent athletic director from Texas, shared a particularly moving story. After hearing about Marcus Duncan, we did an anonymous survey. At our school, we discovered that 30% of our athletes were sharing equipment with siblings or friends. Some were skipping meals to save money for sports gear. We had no idea. The meeting marked the beginning of a national initiative called Equal Play, spearheaded by Jordan's Foundation in partnership with James Miller's organization. Their first action was to establish a comprehensive support system that would be implemented in schools across the country. Meanwhile, back at Lake Forest Academy, Coach William Butler had become an unlikely champion for change. The man who once benched a player for worn-out shoes was now traveling to other schools, sharing his story of transformation and helping implement inclusive athletic programs. The hardest part of this journey, Butler told a group of coaches, in Milwaukee has been confronting our own biases. We talk about sports being a meritocracy, but are we really giving every athlete a fair chance to show their merit? The ripple effects continued to spread. Charles Bryan, a wealthy parent from a rival school, was so moved by Marcus Duncan's story that he established a regional foundation providing sports equipment to underprivileged athletes. My son played against Marcus that night, Bryan explained. Watching that game changed both our lives. We realized we had been part of the problem without even knowing it. The initiative gained unexpected allies in professional athletes. NBA players began sharing their own stories of economic hardship in youth sports. Stephen Best, a star player who grew up in poverty, revealed how he had once played an entire season in shoes 2 sizes too small because his family couldn't afford new ones. But perhaps the most significant impact was happening at the grassroots level. Schools across the country began implementing what became known as the Duncan Protocol, a systematic approach to identifying and addressing economic barriers. In their athletic programs, Jennifer Kelly, a guidance counselor at a small school in Georgia, described how the protocol worked. We created a confidential system where students can indicate their needs without feeling embarrassed. Equipment, transportation, meal assistance, whatever they need to participate fully in sports. The beautiful part is how the whole community has embraced it. The protocol wasn't just about providing equipment, it addressed the entire ecosystem of youth sports participation. Transportation pools were organized, meal programs were expanded, practice schedules were adjusted to accommodate students who needed to work. The goal was to ensure that economic status would never again determine an athlete's opportunity to play. Marcus Duncan, now in his senior year, had become an eloquent advocate for these changes. Speaking at a national youth sports conference, he addressed the deeper implications of his experience. This isn't just about basketball or sports. It's about dignity. It's about every kid having the chance to pursue their dreams without shame or judgment. His mother, Dana Jones, had also found her voice in this movement. Working with other parents, she helped establish a network of support groups for families navigating the economic challenges of youth sports participation. What happened to Marcus opened doors, she said, but more importantly, it opened eyes and hearts. The transformation at Lake Forest Academy continued to serve as a model for other schools. Timothy Wallace, the wealthy student who had once started in Marcus's place, had become one of the program's strongest advocates. Together, with Marcus, they created a peer mentoring system that bridged economic divides through sports. What we learned, Timothy explained during a television interview, is that these barriers don't just hurt the kids who can't afford equipment. They hurt all of us. They rob us of teammates, friends, and the true spirit of competition. The story brought the attention of documentary filmmaker Richard Paul, who began production on a film titled More Than Shoes. The documentary would follow several young athletes facing economic barriers in sports, with Marcus Duncan's story serving as the catalyst for exploring these broader issues. Coach Butler's journal, which he had started keeping after the incident, was published under the title Benched: How I Learned to See Beyond the Surface in Sports. The book became required reading for coaching certification programs across the country. One particularly moving chapter described a moment 6 months after the incident. I was cleaning out my office and found an old photo of our team from the previous year. Everyone was wearing matching new shoes, perfect uniforms. We looked great. But looking at that photo now, I wondered how many talented kids never made it into the frame because they couldn't afford to be there. The Equal Play initiative continued to grow, adapting to meet different needs in different communities. In urban areas, it focused on providing equipment and safe practice spaces. In rural communities, transportation became the primary focus. Every region had its own challenges, but the core principle remained the same. No child should be denied the opportunity to play sports because of economic circumstances. Michael Jordan's involvement remained hands-on. He made surprise visits to schools implementing the program, often bringing along other NBA legends to share their stories. During one such visit, he watched a practice session where players were wearing a mix of new and well-worn equipment. "This," he told the team, "is what sport should look like. Some of you are wearing new shoes, some are wearing hand-me-downs, but you're all playing together, learning together, growing together. That's real teamwork." The initiative's impact began to show in unexpected ways. Schools reported improved attendance rates among student athletes. Team dynamics became stronger as economic barriers fell. Most importantly, talented players who might have been overlooked or discouraged were getting their chance to shine. Sarah Acevedo, a talented volleyball player who had almost quit sports because she couldn't afford the equipment, became her state's Player of the Year after receiving support through the Equal Play program. "Marcus Duncan's story gave me courage," she said. "It helped me understand that needing help doesn't make you less of an athlete." The corporate world took notice too. Major sporting goods companies began establishing their own programs to support underprivileged athletes. Some created recycling programs for gently used equipment, while others implemented pay-what-you-can pricing for school athletic programs. But perhaps the most profound change was in the culture of youth sports itself. The focus began to shift from appearance and equipment to character and ability. Coaches reported that their teams were becoming more inclusive, more supportive, and more focused on what really mattered: the love of the game. At Lake Forest Academy, the trophy case containing Marcus's taped-up shoes had become something of a pilgrimage site for youth sports teams. Coaches would bring their teams to see it, using it as a starting point for discussions about character, opportunity, and what really matters in sports. One day, a young player asked Marcus why he kept playing in taped-up shoes when he could have just quit. His answer captured the essence of everything the movement had come to represent. Because love for the game is stronger than any barrier, and sometimes the barriers we face become the bridges others use to cross after us. The story continued to evolve, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. A group of engineering students, inspired by Marcus's story, began developing low-cost, high-quality athletic equipment. Community organizations started equipment-sharing programs. School boards revised their athletic policies to ensure economic Inclusion. Coach Butler, reflecting on the transformation during a national coaches convention, summed it up perfectly. We talk about sports building character, teaching life lessons. But that night, when Michael Jordan walked into our gym and stood up for Marcus Duncan, I learned the most important lesson of all, that our true character is revealed not in how we treat those who have everything, but in how we treat those who have to fight for their chance to play. The movement that began with a pair of taped-up shoes had become a national conversation about opportunity, dignity, and the true purpose of youth sports. It reminded everyone involved that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single moment of courage, whether it's a legendary athlete standing up for what's right, a coach admitting his mistakes, or a young player refusing to let economic circumstances define his worth. And somewhere in Chicago, in a high school trophy case, a pair of taped-up basketball shoes continues to tell its story, reminding each new generation that the true measure of an athlete and a person has nothing to do with what they wear and everything to do with how they play the game. 5 years after the night that changed youth sports forever, Marcus Duncan stood at center court in the Lake Forest Academy Gymnasium. Now a college graduate and assistant coach at his alma mater, he was addressing a new generation of players. Behind him, those famous taped-up shoes remained in their place of honor, though their story had grown far beyond the confines of this trophy case. Some of you might be tired of hearing about these shoes, Marcus began, a gentle smile playing across his face. But they're not just about me or about what happened that night. They're about every player who ever faced a barrier and refused to let it stop them. They're about every coach who learned to see beyond the surface. They're about how sports can transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The gymnasium was packed for the 5th annual Equal Play Summit, an event that had grown from a small local gathering into a national conference on inclusivity in youth sports. Athletic directors, coaches, and program administrators from across the country had come to learn, share, and witness the lasting impact of what had become known as the Lake Forest Revolution. William Butler, now the national director of the Equal Play Initiative, sat in the front row. The former coach, who had once benched Marcus for his worn shoes, had become one of the most powerful advocates for change in youth sports. His transformation was complete, but his journey continued to inspire others. 5 years ago, I thought I knew what made a successful athletic program, Butler shared with the assembled crowd. I was focused on image, on appearances, on what people could see from the outside. Today, I know that true success in sports is measured by how many barriers we break down, how many opportunities we create, and how many lives we touch. The statistics presented at the summit told a remarkable story. Since the implementation of the Equal Play Initiative, over 500,000 student athletes had received equipment and support. Through the program, participation rates in school sports had increased by 35% among economically disadvantaged students. Team retention rates had improved across all economic backgrounds. Academic performance among supported athletes showed significant improvement. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real impact could be seen in the cultural shift that had taken place in youth sports. The Duncan Protocol, now implemented in schools nationwide, had become a model for identifying and addressing economic barriers in athletics. Michael Jordan, who had made this annual summit a priority in his schedule, took the stage to share some unexpected news. His foundation, in partnership with major sporting goods manufacturers, was launching an innovative program called Legacy Equipment. The idea is simple, Jordan explained. Every piece of sports equipment tells a story. Instead of discarding gently used gear, we're creating a system where it can be passed on, along with the story of the athlete who used it. Every piece will carry a tag with a QR code linking to the story of its previous owner. Imagine receiving basketball shoes that were worn by a state champion, or a baseball glove that helped win a crucial game. We're turning hand-me-downs into handed-down legacies. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, but the most powerful moment came when Jordan invited several young athletes to the stage. Each had a story that echoed Marcus Duncan's experience, but with a crucial difference. They had found support through the systems his story had helped create. Among them was Lisa Green, a sophomore from Seattle who had nearly quit swimming because she couldn't afford competition suits. Through the Equal Play initiative, she not only received the equipment she needed, but went on to break her state's record in the 200-meter freestyle. "The thing is," Lisa said, her voice carrying across the silent gymnasium, "it wasn't just about the suit. It was about knowing that someone cared enough to help, that my dream mattered regardless of my family's economic situation." The conference also highlighted the ripple effects in unexpected areas. Academic counselor Samuel Martinez presented research showing improved classroom performance among student athletes who had received support through the program. "When we remove the stress of economic barriers in sports," Martinez explained, "we free these young people to focus on both athletic and academic achievement. They're not worried about hiding their worn-out equipment or making excuses for missing practice because they can't afford transportation. They can just be students and athletes." The impact extended beyond high school sports. College recruiters reported a more diverse talent pool, with athletes from all economic backgrounds getting opportunities they might have missed before. Several universities had adopted their own versions of the Duncan Protocol for their athletic programs. Timothy Wallace, who had once started in Marcus's place that fateful night, was now working as a sports equipment developer, focusing on creating high-quality, affordable athletic gear. His company's mission statement included a quote from Marcus: "Every athlete deserves equipment that matches their heart." Coach Butler's book had gone into its third printing, with a new chapter added about the long-term impacts of the movement. "The most profound change," he wrote, "isn't in our athletic programs or our equipment rooms. It's in our understanding of what sports can and should be, a true meritocracy where talent and dedication are the only barriers to success." The summit also addressed new challenges and frontiers in the fight for equality in youth sports. Discussion panels tackled issues like the rising costs of travel teams, the accessibility of private coaching, and the economic barriers in emerging sports. Jordan's Foundation announced partnerships with several technology companies to develop virtual coaching platforms, making expert instruction available to athletes regardless of their economic status. "The digital divide shouldn't be the next barrier we have to overcome," Jordan stated. "We're making sure that knowledge and expertise are accessible to everyone who wants to learn." Marcus Duncan's mother, Dana Jones, now ran a national parent support network, helping families navigate the economic challenges of youth sports. "What happened with Marcus opened doors," she said during her summit presentation, "but what's happening now is keeping those doors open for generations to come." The day concluded with a special ceremony where the original Duncan Protocol document was permanently enshrined alongside the taped-up shoes. But before it was placed in the case, Jordan added one final amendment: "Let no child's dream be limited by their economic circumstance. Let no talent go unseen because of the shoes they wear. Let sports be what they were always meant to be, a field of fair play where heart and hustle matter more than the price tag on your equipment." As the summit drew to a close, Marcus gathered with Jordan, Coach Butler, and Timothy Wallace for a photo in front of the trophy case. The image captured something powerful: the convergence of different paths that had led to this moment of transformation in youth sports. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Marcus asked the group. That kid who was so worried about his taped-up shoes. I wish I could tell him what his story would mean to so many others. Jordan smiled, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You tell him every day, through every kid who gets to play because of what happened here. Some victories are bigger than any game. The Legacy Equipment Program launched the following month, with Marcus's story as its first entry. His taped-up shoes had been carefully preserved, but their spirit lived on in every piece of equipment that found its way to a young athlete in need. The movement that began with one coach's mistake and one legend's intervention had evolved into something far more powerful. A fundamental reimagining of what youth sports could be. It wasn't just about providing equipment or removing barriers. It was about creating a new culture where every athlete's journey was valued, regardless of their economic circumstances. As the lights dimmed in the Lake Forest Gymnasium that evening, Marcus took one last look at the trophy case. The taped-up shoes, the Duncan Protocol, and now the Legacy Equipment Program, all pieces of a larger story about transformation, not just in sports, but in how we see and value each other. Sometimes, he mused, the greatest games aren't played on any court. They're played in the moments when we choose to stand up for what's right, when we choose to see beyond the surface, when we choose to make space for everyone who loves the game. And somewhere in Chicago, in countless gyms and on countless courts, young athletes continue to play, their dreams no longer limited by the price of their equipment or the size of their family's bank account. They play in the spirit of that night. When Michael Jordan walked into a gymnasium and reminded everyone what sports are really about, the heart of the player, not the shoes on their feet.